To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, and kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places, and there are so many, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act, and at least the possibility of sending this spinning top of a world in a different direction. And if we do act, in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of present moments. And to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvellous victory. That was said by Howard Zinn. Welcome to Surviving the Matrix, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Maxwell Egan. It's a pleasure to be here again, and I will be your host for the next hour. Now folks, last week I was very much attempting to stress to you, as I so often do, that all the world is a stage, and such is truly the case, ladies and gentlemen. I was also very much suggesting that the oil rig disaster in the Gulf of Mexico is in fact a staged event. And it is, folks. In fact, you will even find an oil spill disaster card in the famous Illuminati card game, along with the attack on the World Trade Center and Pentagon, forced vaccinations, pandemics, and economic collapse cards. Now, last week I ran down a list of a few observations that very much suggest foreknowledge of the event, clearly indicating that it was pre-planned. And there were actually a few things I forgot to mention on that show. I neglected to mention that BP CEO Tony Hayward actually dumped most of his BP stock just prior to the event. That's a little bit of a giveaway, wouldn't you say, folks? I also neglected to mention that the head of Goldman Sachs, the company that dumped 44% of its BP stock and placed shorts on an oil rig disaster in the Gulf of Mexico, was also a former BP CEO. Yes, it's all in the family, folks. It's always all in the family. But there's something else as well, and with this one the plot thickens a little. Now, I'm not sure when it was, maybe early 2009, possibly late 2008. I was talking to people. I may have mentioned it on one of the radio shows, or I may not have. I'm not sure. I'll have to go through the archives. But anyway, I was talking about symbolism and the fact that if you trace lines through the major events that have occurred in recent times within the boundaries of the United States, you'll find something very curious. You can connect the dots between Waco, Texas, Oklahoma City, where Flight 93 came down, the location of the Space Shuttle Columbia disaster, and the World Trade Center and Cyclone Katrina. And what you find is that a Freemason's square and compass is being formed. And at that stage it's almost complete, but one point of the set square is missing, is still yet to be formed. And you can easily see where the point of this set square is likely to be located. When I first mentioned this around 18 months ago, I stated my belief that the next event we would see would be something like a staged terror attack somewhere in Miami, or that the most likely scenario would be something perhaps like a huge tanker or something similar going down in the Gulf of Mexico. It very much indicated that the next event would be some event that is staged in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, I saw someone else on the internet who had made a similar prediction using the same method of analysing the symbolism and geometry of it all. And folks, well, all I can really say now is I rest my case. I'm not sure who I was talking to about it, but I think it may have been the young lady who runs my MySpace page and who has the Miss Griffin 77 YouTube account. I'll have to check with her, but I'm sure if I can't find any mention of it in the radio archives, then I'm sure she'll be able to verify the conversation. But anyway, what I'm attempting to help you understand here is that there should be no doubt that this oil rig disaster was a pre-planned and very deliberate event. And I know that may be a hard thing for people to come to terms with. But at this stage, there seems to be absolutely no doubt of this, folks. Now, a lot of people may move into anger with this information. And with all the process of awakening, folks. When people find out how the world is really run, they find out 9/11 was staged, they find out exactly what our governments are doing, they find out about the Federal Reserve, they find out about all these things, and they tend to move into anger. It's a very natural thing for people to do, but it's also a very important phase of people's awakening. Anger at these realizations, as I said, is very natural. But what's important to understand is that this moment of anger is a crossroads. And what is most important at this point is the action that anger is then channeled into. You've got to be very careful not to be angry and to project things to people in an angry and negative way. When you find out about this stuff and you move into that anger period, I mean, honestly, folks, you just want to go outside and lynch somebody sometimes and start yelling at people and screaming at the top of your voice on the street and telling everyone what's going on. But you simply can't do this, because such actions will simply cause people to go on the defensive and reject the data immediately. And such individuals will more often than not then remain closed to the information from that point onwards. In short, all such actions will succeed in accomplishing is locking the people you are talking to more securely into the matrix. But anger is an important stage, and many people will first move into anger. Usually it's disbelief, and then fear, and then anger. And there are some who will, at this point, simply want to start joining militias and try to tear down the system with violent revolution, or just want to walk up to people on the street and start shaking them and slapping them into wakefulness. But that's really not the way to deal with it either. Sure, it's prudent to be prepared for any situation that may arise, but always bear in mind the fact that history clearly shows us that violent revolution has, in fact, never really achieved anything other than to replace one tyrannical regime with another that eventually ends up just as tyrannical as the first. So violent revolution can only ever be a short-term fix. At best, it's a temporary reprieve rather than a long-term solution. And in order to achieve the type of long-term solution that's truly needed, what is required is not a revolution, but rather an evolution. And what needs to evolve is human consciousness itself. And such an evolution of consciousness can only truly occur through a rise in human awareness. Now, many people contact me, and even just in everyday conversations, I have people approach me and say, well, okay, Max, now I have this information. Now I know there is a criminal cabal running our world. Now I'm aware of all this stuff. So what now? What am I supposed to do now to improve this situation? How do I change things? What is the point of me knowing this stuff if there is no decisive plan on how to fix things? What's the next step? And these are all very valid questions. Well, the most important things anyone can do right from the start is to understand that having true knowledge of how this world is run is not a burden, it's a gift. And that the knowledge itself provides you with the tools you need to help affect change. The first step is to spread information, as no one person can possibly hope to stand against the machine and win. There is very little that any of us can actually do individually in that respect. So the very first step, as I said, is to spread information. Start ripples. Start a local discussion group, and request that each person who attends tries to bring a friend to future meetings. And most importantly, spread information from a center of love and empowerment. And lead by example, folks. Lead by example. As I said, if you approach people from a center of fear and stress, then they are simply going to run the other way, just as they've been trained to do by the system itself. People need to see that you are a better, more empowered and freer person by having this knowledge. If you approach people rambling about doom and gloom and fear of the future, they're going to look at you and think, well, wow, that person is pretty stressed out. I don't want to go there and become like they are. So they will back away from the information. Be happy. Folks, I'm happy. I have all this knowledge about all this negative stuff that's going on in the world, but I'm happy to know it. I certainly feel better knowing what's going on than being ignorant of the facts, because knowing what the facts are provides me with the opportunity to change things.